The DevOps project aims to close the gap between today's and future's skills demands of municipal workforce, by emphasizing on the exploitation of emerging employment paradigms. Its mission is to develop job profiles for smart cities DevOps professionals. DevOps project is an Erasmus Plus project and it has been funded with support from the European Commission.
Competence description. Resilient cities are cities that have the ability to absorb, recover and prepare for future shocks, economic, environmental, social and institutional. Resilient cities promote sustainable development, well-being and inclusive growth.
Due to its ability to connect, amplify, and reinvent different public and social services that are critical to cities' well-being, digital inclusion has gained significance as a resilience enabler in recent years.
Digitalization has taken even more importance due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as people have started changing the way they access services, interact, and navigate spaces.
This module explores the topic of resilience by providing the tools to make smart cities ready to adapt to crises and changes. Planning the resilience of a city also allows seizing the opportunities that can arise from negative events.
Learning objectives. The learning objectives of Smart Cities Resilience module are the following.
Definitions for resilient cities.
Strategy and planning of resilient smart cities.
Transformation of smart cities to resilient smart cities.
Standards and performance indicators for smart city resilience. Competence content. The competence content is divided into the following units.
Introduction to city resilience.
Monitoring smart city resilience.
Improving smart city resilience.
In the first unit, the concept of urban resilience is presented by describing the main principles and concepts of the resilience of smart cities. The methodology introduced by the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction is also examined.
The second unit presents useful tools for local governments for assessing the risk and the level of resilience of a city. It guides the learner to the development of a disaster risk reduction (DRR) action plan which is necessary for improving smart city resilience.
The third unit presented the essential elements for making cities resilient, by promoting sustainable urban development and resilience activities and finally increasing understanding of city risks. Resilience building process. Local government leaders must commit themselves to engage in resilience building and understand the need of investing in disaster risk reduction.
However, disaster risk management is a complex task that requires a collective effort from all the different stakeholders.
Local governments need to collaborate for funding, human resources, knowledge, data and information, professional services, and other resources from the various stakeholders.
It is important to facilitate the engagement of local government decision makers, academia, the private sector, and the community within the local government.
City leaders are expected to develop enabling environments to facilitate effective partnerships. Understanding risk. Learn about the city's risks and conduct necessary risk assessments.
Collect and systematize information on the city's existing risks, including the analysis of historical disaster data.
Carry out a general study or diagnosis of the city that will serve as a baseline of knowledge upon which a risk analysis can be conducted.
Involving different stakeholders, undertake an analysis of current and future threats and hazards.
Develop risk assessments.
Regularly update risk assessments through multi-stakeholder engagement.
Assessing the state of resilience. Analyze gaps and strengths and prepare a resilience assessment report.
Conduct an internal and external analysis of the situation citywide, identifying strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Analyze the key actors and stakeholders, resources, and capacities for DRR and resilience building.
Prepare a draft assessment report based on risk assessments and communicate the outcomes with all relevant stakeholders.
Develop clear mechanisms to integrate risks and their impacts as a decision-making tool across all city departments for their planning and strategies processes.
Publish and communicate the risk assessment report.
Definition of resilient city. A resilient city is one where there is strong leadership and coordination and responsibilities in disaster risk management are delineated. It includes
stakeholder engagement,
well-defined policies and strategies,
effective lines communication and
effective risk management. The city is up to date on knowledge about hazards. Risk assessments are routinely prepared as a basis for urban planning.
there is an adequate financial plan that complements and promotes mechanisms to support resilience activities.
Urban planning is carried out based on up-to-date risk information with a focus on the most vulnerable groups.
Natural ecosystems within and around the city's territory are identified, protected and monitored.
There is a strategy to protect critical infrastructure and ensure service continuity.
Effective disaster response is ensured.
Post-disaster recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction strategies are in place. Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030 was adopted by the UN member states on the 18th of March 2015 at the 3rd UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai City, Miyagi Prefecture, Japan.
It is the first major agreement of the 2030 Development Agenda, and aims for the substantial reduction of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, and health, and in the economic, physical, social, cultural and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries.
Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. The 4 priorities for action.
Priority 1.
Understanding disaster risk.
Disaster risk management should be based on an understanding of disaster risk in all its dimensions of vulnerability, capacity, exposure of persons and assets, hazard characteristics, and the environment. Priority 2.
Strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk.
Disaster risk governance at the national, regional, and global levels is very important for prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and rehabilitation. Priority 3.
Investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience.
Public and private investment in disaster risk prevention and reduction through structural and non-structural measures are essential to enhance economic, social, health, and cultural resilience. Priority 4.
Enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction.
The growth of disaster risk means that there is a need to strengthen disaster preparedness for response, take action in the anticipation of events, and ensure capacities are in place for effective response and recovery at all levels.
Establishing a plan of action for resilience. Define programs and projects and institutionalize the action plan.
Develop a DRR action plan, clearly highlighting the time frames, implementation and monitoring mechanisms, and financing options.
Identify key activities and priorities for the action plan, highlighting both short and long-term targets in developing the resilience of the city.
Develop a detailed plan for each activity, identifying the expected date of completion, responsible departments, stakeholders, expected impact, key performance indicators, and the monitoring and evaluation criteria.
Incorporate all elements of the action plan into the city's development plan and programs.
Outline the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders towards achieving the DRR action plan.
Present the DRR action plan to all relevant stakeholders and make them aware of the proposed activities and their roles and responsibilities in achieving the expected outcome.
Publish and widely disseminate the action plan to ensure the entire community is aware of its contents.
The 10 essentials actions for making cities disaster resilient are:
Organize for disaster resilience.
Identify, understand and use current and future risk scenarios.
Strengthen financial capacity for resilience.
Pursue resilient urban development and design.
Safeguard natural buffer to enhance the protective functions offered by natural ecosystems.
Strengthen institutional capacity for resilience.
Understand and strengthen societal capacity for resilience.
Increase infrastructure resilience.
Ensure effective disaster response.
Expedite recovery and build better.
The 10 essentials seek to cover the many issues that cities need to address in order to become more resilient.
The application of the essentials serves to enable cities to establish a baseline measurement of their current level of disaster resilience, to identify priorities for investment and action, and to track their progress in improving disaster resilience over time.
It intends to guide cities towards optimal resilience, and to challenge complacency, reminding authorities and stakeholders that there is always always more to be done to ensure lasting resilience.
Competence learning outcomes. Upon completion of this module, the learner will be able
to understand the requirements needed for transforming a smart city to resilient,
to comprehend the priorities set at Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction,
to identify the main actors involved in obtaining sustainable development and disaster risk reduction,
to assess city resilience,
to propose methods to improve the resilience of a city,